Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Melissa Caddick? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Melissa Caddick was born on April 21, 1971, and grew up in a suburb of Sydney, Australia. She graduated from high school and enrolled at a college in Sydney to study secretarial work. It's not clear what she really earned as far as her education. Later, she falsely claimed that she had a degree in finance from the University of Technology, Sydney. Melissa found work with a company that offered roadside assistance. She left that job to work for an investment bank. Sometime in 1998, her employer discovered that she had forged her supervisor's signature on a number of checks and stolen over $1,000. Her employer made a deal with her. If she left immediately, she could keep the money and they would not call the police. Melissa agreed to those terms. I guess her employer figured that because she passed the check, they could pass the buck. They didn't care about what she did as long as she was somebody else's problem. Melissa found a job as a financial advisor for a place called Wise Financial Services, a division of a large bank called the ING Group. She borrowed $750,000 and purchased 25% of the company. The company liked her performance for a while, but then they became concerned because she wasn't following the rules. They offered her the original $750,000 back and sent her on her way. Sometime before this, in April 2000, Melissa married a laborer named Tony Caddick. They had a son in 2006. Tony completed a law degree and became an attorney in Britain. The family moved to Britain in 2010. Melissa became bored living there. She told her husband that she needed to update her financial skills. Therefore, she wanted to attend a conference in Switzerland. Melissa actually went to Paris to meet a hairdresser from Sydney, Australia, named Anthony Coletti. He was about 11 years younger than Melissa. Melissa did not update her financial skills, but she did update her infidelity skills. Before moving to the timeline of the crime, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, HelloFresh. Enjoy fall's freshest flavors. Every HelloFresh recipe includes ripe, just-picked produce that travels from the farm to your door in less than a week. HelloFresh works with your schedule. Plans are flexible, and you can change your meal preferences, update your delivery day, and even change your address with just a few taps on the HelloFresh app. Getting back into the fall season can be busy, but weeknights can be made so much easier with foolproof, step-by-step recipes ready in around 30 minutes or less. Fit and wholesome recipes make it easy to eat well without sacrificing flavor, so you can maintain your goals and feel good about your food choices with HelloFresh. HelloFresh recipes include pre-portioned ingredients that mean less preparation for you and less wasted food. HelloFresh cuts down on your food waste by at least 25% compared to grocery shopping. After a long day of researching, analyzing, and recording, I'm always happy to save time and have a great meal with HelloFresh. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code DrGrande65 for 65% off plus free shipping. That's 65% off plus free shipping at HelloFresh.com, code DrGrande65. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. Sometime around January 2012, Melissa's husband, Tony, figured out that Melissa was having an affair with Anthony Coletti. Tony confronted Melissa. She cleaned out their bank accounts and moved to Sydney along with her son. She told people in Australia that Tony had engaged in domestic violence. In 2013, the couple divorced. Later that same year, Melissa married Anthony. Melissa started her own financial advisory firm. Starting sometime in 2012, she established a Ponzi scheme and defrauded investors out of millions of dollars over the course of several years. She had over 60 clients in total. She knew most of them personally, like they were friends and family members. Melissa did not have her Australian financial services license, which is required to make investments. She used somebody else's license illegally. During her time providing services, she made some traditional investments, but she made them in her name and used the dividends to fund her lifestyle. So she was making her clients' money work, but it was working for her. For quite some time, Melissa managed to avoid suspicion. One of her investors asked Melissa to return $2.8 million to her. Melissa did so without incident. Melissa was producing detailed reports which accounted for the money each month. Most people had no idea that anything might be amiss. She told some investors that they would have to wait to invest with her because she only took so many clients on at a time. When an investor dropped out, she would contact them. Melissa was creating the idea of scarcity, making people believe that it was a privilege to have her take their money. Melissa lived east of Sydney in a $7 million house in Dover Heights. This is also where she worked. She lived a lavish lifestyle, owned luxury cars, expensive clothing and jewelry. She had the best of everything. Between 2017 and 2020, the records from her American Express card indicated that she spent $230,000 at Dior and $180,000 at Canturi Jewelry. She also traveled overseas 25 times since 2009. Melissa and her husband burned through $600,000 a year funding their luxurious lifestyle. Melissa's life and business seemed to be going well from an outside perspective, but then problems started to appear. People noticed that some aspects of her investments were not quite right. The authorities began investigating. On November 11, 2020, investigators raided Melissa's house in Dover Heights. They took computers, phones, stacks of documents, and about $1 million worth of clothing, shoes, and jewelry. The raid lasted about 12 hours. Investigators left the house at about 7 p.m. Melissa was last seen sometime around midnight. The next morning, now November 12, at 5:30 a.m., Melissa's son heard the door close and assumed that she was leaving, but he never actually saw her. He believed that she went outside to exercise. Her phone and her purse were still in the house. Melissa's husband, Anthony, did not report Melissa missing until 30 hours later. He told the police that she had gone jogging. Was she jogging to another city, like maybe Canberra? 30 hours represents a lot of exercise. At this point, an investigation into Melissa's disappearance was initiated. Some of Melissa's friends believed that she was a victim of foul play. They said that she would never have left her family voluntarily. These surveillance cameras at Melissa's residence malfunctioned on the morning she went missing. It's believed that the investigators disrupted that system during the raid. Many who were initially worried about Melissa being hurt or killed then started realizing that maybe she ran off because of this whole situation with the money. They checked into their investments and realized that their accounts did not exist. Investigators would later say that investors working with Melissa lost somewhere around $25 million. Anthony Coletti was left in kind of a bad situation. Melissa had paid all the bills. She earned, or otherwise obtained, all the money. People said Melissa was the breadwinner, more like the bread stealer, but either way, Anthony didn't have enough money. Anthony was an unemployed hairdresser and a part-time DJ, not exactly a career path associated with high earnings. With the ongoing investigation, Anthony was given an $800 a week allowance from the authorities. He went to court and said that he only had $1.95 left, and he had a lot of expenses. Just to name a few, $40,000 a year for a private school, $500 a week for supermarket expenses, $60 a week for cigarettes, $19,000 to pay for the house, and $5,000 a month to pay for Melissa's parents' house. Anthony asked for a $5,000 a week allowance. His allowance was increased to $1,700 a week. Eventually, much of Melissa's property was seized. Anthony wasn't left with hardly anything. Investigators assumed that Melissa was on the run. She had taken off to a foreign country, established a new identity. They thought she was probably living a lavish lifestyle in some mansion. In reality, Melissa was much closer to home than the authorities suspected, and much more distant from living than they figured. On February 21, 2021, campers walking on a beach about 250 miles away from Sydney found a shoe with a foot still in it. DNA tests confirmed that the foot belonged to Melissa Caddick. After analyzing the current and the tidal pattern, investigators concluded that the foot's location was consistent with Melissa going into the water in Dover Heights around the time she disappeared. As a side note, apparently more shoes with feet in them are being discovered recently due to the design of modern running shoes. These shoes are more buoyant than older models and can float long distances on the ocean and on other bodies of water. For those shoe buyers that are worried about dying at sea and never being identified, this feature could be a real selling point. Moving back to the timeline, the police believe that Melissa brought an end to her own life. It's also possible that she was murdered. Some people believe that Melissa could still be alive. A person can survive without a foot, but removing one's foot is pretty difficult and a somewhat painful process. I would be very surprised if Melissa had that level of commitment to fake her own death. In addition, it's not a great disguise. People would notice that her foot was missing. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. When investigators raided Melissa's expensive house, they described her as calm, compliant, and embarrassed. At one point, she took a nap. Other than the fact that she was suspected of defrauding investors out of millions of dollars, they said there was no reason to believe that she had committed a crime based on her appearance. Item number 2. As I mentioned, it seems fairly obvious that Melissa shared the same fate as her foot. She probably caused her own death. On one occasion, Melissa walked to a cliff at Dover Heights and told a friend, "If I'm going to end it, it's going to be here." Before Melissa's foot was recovered, the police thought that she had fled the area. One of the reasons they believed this was because none of the video surveillance cameras in the area captured Melissa making her way from her house to the cliff. Investigators didn't see any way that Melissa could have jumped because there was no way she could have made it to the cliff in the first place without being detected by the cameras. They assumed that if she was making that trip with the intent of jumping, she wouldn't be worried about whether or not she was captured on video surveillance. Evidently, this assumption was incorrect. Perhaps Melissa dodged the cameras because she wanted to keep her options open, like she wasn't positive that she was ready to take the leap, so to speak. Item number 3. Melissa is sometimes thought of as a particularly cold con artist because she primarily defrauded family and friends. For example, her elderly parents were among her victims. She took over $1 million from them. I think it's more likely that Melissa somehow believed that she would figure a way out, like the Ponzi scheme could magically go on forever. I'm not sure she really understood the math behind the Ponzi scheme. Melissa was taking money from some investors and using it to pay other investors. Unless she could find an unending source of new investors, there is no way that this could be maintained indefinitely. Melissa did not appreciate how Ponzi schemes always collapse. It is a mathematical certainty. This brings me to item number 4. Why did Melissa bring an end to her own life when she had millions of dollars available and could have fled the country? I think it comes down to the idea that she was unrealistically optimistic. As I mentioned, she thought that there was a way to escape the Ponzi scheme. She wasn't ready to face the humiliation of being arrested and sent to prison. When she was standing there looking at investigators taking her ill-gotten belongings, she realized that the truth was going to be known by everyone. It would be a big story. She probably still had enough time to escape with at least some of the money, but she could not escape with her pride. The investigators had seized her pride, just like they had seized her jewelry, clothing, and other belongings. I think this is why Melissa chose to die. It wasn't just about the lavish lifestyle that she was going to lose. It was about the respect that she would lose. She believed that she was a fabulous and incredible person, and now people would not believe that. It was all about the image and that party was over. The degree to which Melissa was lost in her fantasy is exemplified in one particular item in her will. She left an apartment in Aspen, Colorado to one of her relatives, even though she never actually owned the apartment. It was rented. Even in death, she wanted to stall the inevitable discovery of her fraud by just a few more moments. She was living on borrowed time, and her plan was to always borrow more time. This, of course, was impossible. Item number 5. Investigators were not sure what to make of Melissa's husband, Anthony Coletti. Some of them thought that he had no knowledge of Melissa's fraud. They have stated directly that they don't think he had the intellectual capacity to understand what she was doing. Other people think that Anthony is more intelligent than he looks. He must have known what his wife was up to. They believe that Anthony's behavior was bizarre and suspicious. A few examples of their reasons for believing this. Anthony could not recall the last time he saw his wife. Anthony provided the police conflicting versions of events. For example, he didn't know who found his wife's phone and where it was located. Anthony described the clothing that his wife had on when she left the house, yet he said he did not see her leave the house. Nobody saw her leave the house. Video surveillance cameras revealed that Melissa had not been out jogging for 4 weeks prior to her disappearance. Yet Anthony said that this was her daily routine. And Anthony conducted his own little investigation. At one point, he went to a dog park and took a photograph of a shoe print as if he had cracked the case wide open. This is like someone being proud of themselves for finding a snowflake in the Arctic Circle. When considering the available evidence, I think it's reasonable to believe that Anthony did not know what Melissa was doing. She kept it a secret from everyone else. She could have kept it a secret from him. I think that Anthony was just enjoying the lifestyle and not really worrying too much about where the money came from. Perhaps Anthony was in denial. Now moving to the final item, number 6. What do I think happened in the case of Melissa Caddick? This is just a theory, my opinion. Melissa had antisocial and narcissistic traits. She started lying and stealing at a young age. Her goal was to obtain the admiration of others. She bought jewelry, clothing, fancy cars, and expensive homes to impress people. She wanted people to see what she had purchased. She created a fantasy that deceived other people and, to some extent, even deceived herself. She became increasingly distant from the part of her which was realistic. I suppose being distant from oneself is a theme in this case. For example, ultimately, Melissa was also distant from her foot. When the investigation forced her to reunite with realism, it was not a happy reunion. She found the pain to be unacceptable. In her mind, it was better to face a quick death than years of shame. Melissa had created an unsustainable financial enterprise and tied her own existence to it. She decided that she would share the same fate as her poorly devised scheme. Those are my thoughts on the case of Melissa Caddick. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.